The distant crack of thunder echoed across the endless Montana sky as Olivia Simmons sat alone in the small wooden church of Redemption Creek, watching the first drops of rain streak across the stained glass windows. It was 1875, and the promise she had made to her dying mother 6 months ago to maintain the church that had been the heart of their community for 20 years weighed heavily on her 22-year-old shoulders. Olivia adjusted the lantern on the altar, the flame casting dancing shadows across the worn wooden pews. The evening service had ended hours ago, but she had stayed behind to mend the hymnal books damaged by last week's leak in the roof. Her fingers moved methodically, applying glue to loose pages, the familiar smell of leather and paper filling her nostrils. A sudden gust of wind rattled the windows, causing Olivia to look up. The storm was gathering force, faster than she had anticipated. She should head home soon, before the dirt roads turned to mud, making the journey to her small cabin at the edge of town treacherous in the darkness. As she rose to gather her things, a strange smell caught her attention, not the usual scent of beeswax candles and old wood, but something acrid and alarming. Smoke. Turning toward the rear of the church, Olivia's heart stuttered as she saw a thin gray line seeping through the doorway that led to the small adjoining room where the pastor kept his books. "No," she whispered, moving cautiously toward the door. The wind must have knocked over a lantern, or perhaps lightning had struck nearby. When she touched the wooden door, it was warm beneath her palm. Summoning her courage, Olivia pushed the door open. A wall of heat and smoke instantly assaulted her, driving her backward with a gasp. Flames were already consuming the bookshelves, climbing rapidly up the wooden walls toward the ceiling. The fire had found a hungry path, feeding on decades of dried timber and papers. Panic seized her chest as she ran back to the main chapel, grabbing the small bucket of water kept near the entrance. It was futile, a drop in an inferno, but instinct drove her to try. The bucket slipped from her trembling hands, spilling across the floor as she heard the terrible sound of cracking wood overhead. Outside, the storm had fully erupted. Rain lashed against the windows, but the water couldn't reach the growing fire inside. Olivia moved toward the main entrance, but a thunderous crash stopped her. A burning beam had fallen, blocking her path to freedom. Smoke filled her lungs as she stumbled back toward the altar, coughing violently. The church, her mother's beloved sanctuary, was being devoured before her eyes. Tears streamed down her face, partly from the smoke, partly from desperation. She was trapped. "Help!" she screamed, though she knew the church stood at the edge of town, too far for anyone to hear over the storm. "Please help me." Through watering eyes, Olivia watched in horror as the fire spread to the main chapel, flames climbing the walls with terrifying speed. The heat was becoming unbearable, her skin burning though the flames hadn't yet reached her. Backing up against the far wall near the altar, she slid down to the floor, covering her mouth with her shawl. Her mother's face flashed before her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I couldn't save it." The roar of the fire grew louder, drowning out even the thunder outside. Darkness crept at the edges of her vision as the smoke thickened. Then, through the haze and the crackling flames, she heard something else, the splintering of wood, not from the fire, but from the main doors being forced open. "Hello?" A deep voice called out. "Is anyone in here?" "Here," Olivia cried, her voice breaking. "I'm here." Through the smoke and flames appeared a tall figure, a bandana pulled up over his nose and mouth. His hat was pulled low, but Olivia could see intense eyes scanning the burning room. The stranger's gaze locked onto her, and without hesitation, he charged through a gap in the flames. "Can you walk?" he asked, crouching beside her. Olivia nodded, though she wasn't certain her legs would support her. The man, a cowboy, judging by his attire, didn't wait for further confirmation. He scooped her up in his arms as if she weighed nothing at all. "Hold tight and keep your face covered," he instructed, his voice muffled through the cloth. Olivia buried her face against his chest as he navigated back through the burning church. She could feel the heat intensifying, hear the groaning of the structure as it began to surrender to the flames. The cowboy moved swiftly, ducking beneath a falling timber at the last possible moment. Then suddenly, blessedly, cool night air hit her face. They burst through the doorway just as a deafening crack announced the collapse of the church's roof behind them. The cowboy didn't stop, carrying her a safe distance away before gently setting her down on the wet grass. Rain poured down on them both as Olivia gazed in horror at the church. Flames shot skyward, illuminating the night in an unholy glow. The steeple, which had stood as a beacon for the town since its founding, wavered and then toppled, crashing down in a shower of sparks. "No!" she cried out, attempting to rise, though to what purpose she couldn't say. There was nothing to be done. The church was lost. Strong hands caught her shoulders, preventing her from moving toward the inferno. "It's too late," the cowboy said, his voice gentler now. "The whole structure's coming down." Olivia collapsed back onto the ground, sobs racking her body. Years of memories, her mother singing in the choir, her father reading from scripture before he was taken by the fever, her own childhood spent playing beneath the pews, all consumed by unforgiving flames. The cowboy knelt beside her, removing his bandana and hat. Rain plastered his dark hair to his forehead, running down his face in rivulets that mixed with soot. In the firelight, she could see he was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 25 or 26, with a strong jaw shadowed by stubble and eyes the color of the storm clouds above. "I'm Rylan Hayes," he said, his voice raised over the storm and the fire. "Are you hurt?" Olivia shook her head, though she wasn't entirely sure it was true. Everything felt numb. "Olivia Simmons," she managed between sobs. "The church. My mother's church." Understanding softened Rylan's features. He shrugged off his long coat and draped it around her shoulders. "We need to get you somewhere dry." "Is your home nearby?" "On the other side of town," Olivia replied, her eyes still fixed on the burning building. People were starting to gather now, drawn by the glow on the horizon. There were shouts for water, for help, but Olivia knew it was a lost cause. The church that had stood for generations would be nothing but ashes by morning. "My camp is closer," Rylan said, glancing at the growing crowd. "Let's get you warmed up and make sure you didn't breathe in too much smoke." Olivia hesitated, looking back at the ruins of her mother's church. The promise she had made felt like it was burning away with every timber. "There's nothing more you can do here tonight," Rylan said gently, seeming to read her thoughts. "Come on. You're shaking." He was right. Now that the initial shock was wearing off, Olivia realized she was trembling violently. Whether from cold or fear or grief, she couldn't tell. Perhaps all three. Reluctantly, she allowed Rylan to help her to her feet. A bay horse stood patiently beneath a nearby tree, seemingly unfazed by the chaos. Rylan led her to it, then mounted and reached down to pull her up behind him. Olivia hesitated only a moment before taking his hand. As the horse began moving away from the burning church, she couldn't help looking back one last time. "Hold on," Rylan instructed, and Olivia wrapped her arms around his waist as they rode through the storm, leaving behind the fiery remains of everything she had promised to protect. Rylan's camp was tucked away in a small clearing among a stand of pines, not far from the eastern edge of town. A crude lean to provided shelter for his bedroll and supplies, while a small fire pit, now cold and wet from the rain, marked the center of the camp. He helped Olivia dismount, his hands strong and steady at her waist. "It's not much," he said, leading her toward the lean-to. but it'll keep the rain off. The space beneath the shelter was dry, if cramped. Rylan quickly rearranged his belongings to make room for them both, then retrieved a canteen and a blanket from his saddlebags. "Drink," he instructed, handing her the water. "Smoke dries you out something fierce." Olivia accepted the canteen with trembling hands. Now that they were away from the fire, the reality of what had happened was sinking in. The church was gone. Her promise to her mother, broken. She took a long drink, the water soothing her raw throat. "Thank you," she said, her voice hoarse, "for saving my life." Rylan busied himself with starting a small fire at the edge of the shelter where the smoke could escape. "I was passing by when I saw the flames. Couldn't just ride past." His hands worked methodically, striking flint against steel until a spark caught in the tinder. "What were you doing there alone at night during a storm?" "Repairing hymnal books," Olivia replied, watching as he coaxed the tiny flame to life. "I'm the caretaker. Or I was." The fire caught properly, casting a warm glow over them both. Rylan settled back, studying her face in the flickering light. "You're mighty young to be a church caretaker." "I promised my mother before she died," Olivia explained, pulling his coat tighter around her shoulders. 6 months ago, that church was everything to her. Understanding dawned in Rylan's eyes. "I'm sorry about the church. And your mother." "Everyone loved her," Olivia continued, the words spilling out now. "She came here with my father when Redemption Creek was hardly more than a few buildings and a dream. They built that church together, board by board." A fresh wave of grief washed over her. "And now it's gone, just like them." Rylan was quiet for a moment, watching the fire. "Buildings can be rebuilt," he finally said. "The important thing is you made it out alive." Olivia nodded, though the weight of her loss felt crushing. "I don't know what I'll do now. That church was all I had left of them." "You don't have other family?" "No. My brother died at Shiloh. It's just been me since Mother passed." She looked up at him, really seeing him for the first time since they'd arrived at his camp. His face was lean but kind, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he wasn't smiling now. "What about you? What brings you to Redemption Creek?" Rylan prodded the fire with a stick. "Just passing through. I do odd jobs, ranch work mostly. Go where the work takes me." "A drifter," Olivia said softly. "I prefer to think of it as being unattached," he replied with a slight quirk of his lips. "Freer that way." The rain continued to fall outside their shelter, a steady drumming on the canvas above. Despite the horror of the night, Olivia found herself strangely comfortable in this stranger's company. Perhaps it was simply the shock or the gratitude she felt toward him, but there was something solid and reassuring about Rylan Hayes. "We should get some rest," he said, spreading a bedroll for her. "You can have this. I'll keep watch by the fire." Olivia started to protest but found she lacked the energy. The events of the night had drained her completely. "What will happen tomorrow?" she asked, the question directed as much at herself as at him. Rylan shrugged. "Tomorrow comes whether we're ready or not. We'll figure it out then." He hesitated, then added, "I won't leave you to face it alone. I promise you that." It was a simple promise from a man she'd just met, but in that moment, it meant everything to Olivia. She nodded her thanks, too overcome with emotion to speak, and settled onto the bedroll. Despite her certainty that sleep would be impossible, exhaustion pulled her under almost immediately. The last thing she saw before her eyes closed was Rylan Hayes sitting sentinel by the fire, his profile strong against the night, watching over her as the storm raged on. Morning came with a brutal clarity that night's chaos had mercifully obscured. Olivia woke to birds singing and sunlight filtering through the trees, a jarring contrast to the destruction she knew awaited her in town. For a moment, she lay still, hoping perhaps it had all been a terrible dream. "You're awake!" Rylan's voice came from nearby. He was crouched by a small cooking fire, coffee brewing in a battered pot. He looked as if he hadn't slept, shadows beneath his eyes, but he offered her a gentle smile. "How are you feeling?" Olivia sat up slowly, testing her body. Her throat still burned from the smoke, and her eyes felt raw, but physically she seemed intact. "I'm alive," she answered, which was the most honest assessment she could give. Rylan nodded, understanding in his gaze. He poured coffee into a tin cup and brought it to her. "It's not fancy, but it's hot." "Thank you." She took the cup, allowing the warmth to seep into her hands. "For everything. I don't know how to repay you." "No need," he replied, settling across from her. Anyone would have done the same, but they hadn't, Olivia thought. It had been Rylan Hayes who had charged into a burning building to save a stranger. "Still, I'm grateful." They drank their coffee in companionable silence, the morning air cool and fresh after the storm. Finally, Olivia set down her cup with resolve. "I need to go back," she said. "I need to see what's left." Rylan studied her for a moment, then nodded. "I'll take you." They broke camp efficiently, Rylan's movements practiced and quick. He helped her onto his horse, then mounted behind her, his arms encircling her waist as he took the reins. The ride into town was silent, both of them lost in their own thoughts. The church came into view all too soon. In the harsh light of day, the destruction was even more devastating than Olivia had feared. Nothing remained of the proud structure but a skeletal frame of blackened beams and the stone foundation. The stained glass windows her father had so painstakingly installed were gone, melted away in the inferno. The graveyard behind the church, where her parents rested, appeared untouched, a small mercy in the midst of devastation. A small crowd had gathered, townspeople standing in silent witness to the ruins. As Rylan helped Olivia dismount, heads turned toward them. "Olivia!" A woman's voice called out, and Martha Wilson, the general store owner's wife, rushed forward. "Oh, my dear girl, we feared the worst when we couldn't find you last night." "She was with me," Rylan said, his voice level. "I got her out before the roof collapsed." Martha's eyes widened as she took in Rylan, a stranger to the town. Before she could ask questions, the town sheriff, Bill Thornton, approached, his weathered face grim. "Miss Simmons," he said, tipping his hat. "Glad to see you safe." "And you are, sir?" "Rylan Hayes," he answered, extending his hand. "Just happened to be passing by when I saw the flames." The sheriff shook his hand. "Then the town owes you a debt of gratitude, Mr. Hayes. We were about to organize a search party, fearing Miss Simmons might have been inside." Olivia hardly heard their conversation, her eyes fixed on the ruins of the church. Slowly, she walked toward what had been the entrance, stopping at the edge of the blackened threshold. The smell of smoke and ash was overwhelming, bringing back the terror of the previous night in vivid detail. "Do you know how it started?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The sheriff moved to stand beside her. "Lightning strike, most likely. Hit the bell tower, according to witnesses who saw it from a distance. By the time anyone reached town to sound the alarm, it was too far gone." Olivia nodded numbly. An act of God destroying his own house. There was a bitter irony there that she couldn't fully process. "What happens now?" she asked. Sheriff Thornton sighed. "That's for the town council to decide, I suppose." The church was. Well, it was the heart of Redemption Creek. "I promised my mother I would take care of it," Olivia said, tears threatening again. "I failed her." "No one could have prevented this, Miss Simmons," the sheriff said kindly. "Sometimes things just happen, and we have to find a way forward." As they stood contemplating the ruins, Reverend Thomas, who had served as pastor for the last 5 years, approached. His face was drawn with grief, but he managed a small smile when he saw Olivia. "The Lord protects his own," he said, taking her hands in his. "When I heard the church was burning, my heart was heavy with fear for you. I'm grateful you're safe." "Mr. Hayes saved me," Olivia explained, glancing back at Rylan, who stood a respectful distance away, hat in hand. The Reverend turned to Rylan. "Then you have my deepest thanks, sir. The Lord must have guided you to our town at just the right moment." Rylan shifted uncomfortably under the praise. "Just did what needed doing," he mumbled. "Well, what needs doing now is figuring out where we'll hold services until we can rebuild," Reverend Thomas said, turning back to the ruins with determination. "This is a setback, not an end." His words sparked something in Olivia, a tiny flame of hope amidst the ashes. "Rebuild?" she repeated. "Of course," the Reverend said, surprise in his voice. "Did you think we would simply abandon our place of worship? Your parents helped build this church, Olivia. I think they would want us to raise it again." For the first time since the fire, Olivia felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She hadn't failed her promise, not completely. The building might be gone, but the spirit of the church, the community her parents had helped create, remained. "I want to help," she said firmly. "Whatever it takes to rebuild." The Reverend smiled. "I expected nothing less from Jacob and Eleanor Simmons' daughter. But first you should rest. You've had a terrible ordeal." Martha Wilson stepped forward. "You'll stay with us, of course, until we sort things out. Our spare room is yours for as long as you need it." Olivia thanked her, grateful for the offer, then turned to find Rylan. He stood apart from the townspeople, looking somewhat out of place among their tight-knit group. When their eyes met, something unspoken passed between them, a connection forged in fire and danger. "What about you?" she asked, approaching him. "Where will you go?" Rylan glanced at the horizon, then back at her. "I thought I might stick around for a bit. Sounds like there'll be work rebuilding." A faint smile touched his lips. "Besides, I promised I wouldn't leave you to face this alone." Relief washed through Olivia, surprising in its intensity. She hardly knew this man, yet the thought of him leaving troubled her deeply. "I'd like that," she admitted. "Then it's settled," Rylan said, his eyes warming. "I'll find a place in town and offer my services for the rebuilding." As the townspeople began dispersing, making plans for temporary services and discussing the rebuilding effort, Olivia took one last look at the church ruins. Amid the destruction, a single charred cross still stood against the morning sky, damaged but unbroken, a symbol of resilience. Perhaps, she thought, some promises could be kept after all, just in ways she hadn't imagined. With Rylan Hayes at her side, Olivia turned away from the ashes of her past, ready to face whatever the future might hold. 3 days after the fire, Redemption Creek was buzzing with activity. The town council had met and unanimously voted to rebuild the church as quickly as possible. Donations had already begun pouring in, not just money, but lumber, nails, tools, and promises of labor. Olivia had settled into the Wilson spare room, though she spent most of her days at the church site, salvaging what little could be saved and clearing away debris. The work was hard but purposeful. Each piece of chard which she removed bringing them one step closer to rebuilding. Rylan had found lodging at the town's small boarding house and had quickly made himself useful. His strength and carpentry skills had impressed even the most skeptical townspeople, and he worked from sunrise to sunset alongside the other men. On this particular afternoon, Olivia was carefully sifting through ashes near what had been the altar when she uncovered something that made her heart skip. Brushing away soot, she revealed a small brass box, its surface blackened but intact. With trembling fingers, She opened it to find the church's communion set, a small silver chalice and plate that had somehow survived the inferno. "Olivia!" Rylan's voice called from behind her. "Martha asked me to remind you about supper. Said she won't have you missing another meal." Olivia looked up, a smile breaking through the grime on her face. "Look what I found," she said, holding up the box. Rylan crouched beside her, examining the tarnished silver pieces. "A sign?" he asked, a hint of teasing in his voice. "Perhaps," she admitted. "It seems foolish to find hope in a couple of old silver pieces. But not foolish at all," Rylan said, his voice softening. "Sometimes we need tangible reminders that not everything is lost." Their eyes met over the small treasure, and Olivia felt a now familiar warmth spread through her chest. In just a few days, Rylan Hayes had become a constant in her life, a steady presence amidst the chaos of loss and rebuilding. "Thank you," she said quietly. Rylan's brow furrowed. "For what this time? For understanding. For staying." Olivia carefully returned the communion set to its box. "Most people in town look at me with pity. You just help." A half-smile tugged at Rylan's lips. "Maybe I understand something about rebuilding from ashes." He offered his hand to help her up. "Come on. Martha's making her famous stew, and I've been warned not to return without you." As they walked toward town, Olivia found herself stealing glances at the man beside her. Dust and sweat had settled into the creases around his eyes, and his hands were rough from days of hard labor. Yet he moved with an easy grace that belied his strength. She wondered about his past, what had set him on the path of a drifter, but something held her back from asking directly. "Will there be a service tomorrow?" Rylan asked as they neared the Wilsons' home. Olivia nodded. "In the town hall. Reverend Thomas says it's important to maintain our rituals, especially now." She hesitated, then added, "Will you come?" Rylan seemed to consider the question carefully. "Been a while since I set foot in a proper service," he admitted. "But I suppose there's a first time for everything. Or a first time in a long time, at least." His answer pleased her more than it should have. "I'll save you a seat," she promised. Dinner at the Wilsons' was a lively affair. Martha and her husband George had 3 children, all under the age of 10, and their home was always filled with noise and laughter. Tonight, they had also invited Reverend Thomas and Sheriff Thornton to discuss the rebuilding plans. "The foundation is still sound," Sheriff Thornton was saying as they passed around fresh bread. "That's something to be grateful for. And the cemetery was spared," Reverend Thomas added. "A blessing that." Martha turned to Olivia. "I heard you found some treasures in the ashes today?" Olivia nodded, describing the communion set. "I've left it with Reverend Thomas. It will need cleaning, but it seems intact." "Remarkable," George Wilson said, shaking his head. "Silver surviving that inferno. Almost makes a man believe in miracles." "Oh, I believe the real miracle was Mr. Hayes showing up when he did," Martha said, beaming at Rylan. "Providence, that's what it was." Rylan shifted uncomfortably under the attention. "Just lucky timing," he demurred. "Luck, providence, call it what you will," Reverend Thomas said. "The Lord works in mysterious ways. Speaking of which, Mr. Hayes, will you be joining us for services tomorrow?" "He will," Olivia answered before Rylan could respond. "I've already secured his promise." Rylan gave her a look that mingled amusement and something like gratitude. "Wouldn't miss it," he confirmed. After dinner, while Martha and George put the children to bed, Olivia and Rylan stepped out onto the porch. The night was clear, stars spreading across the vast Montana sky in glittering profusion. They stood side by side, comfortable in the silence between them. "Beautiful night," Rylan finally said, his voice low. "It is," Olivia agreed. Hard to believe that just a few nights ago. Best not to dwell on it, Rylan advised gently. Look forward, not back. Olivia turned to study his profile in the soft light spilling from the windows. Is that what you do? Always look forward. Something flickered across Rylan's face, a shadow of old pain quickly masked. Learned that lesson the hard way, he said after a moment. The past has a way of weighing you down if you let it. Is that why you drift? To stay ahead of the past. Rylan's eyes met hers, surprise evident in them. You're more perceptive than most, Olivia Simmons. She waited, hoping he might elaborate, but he simply gazed back up at the stars. Olivia sensed there were depths to Rylan Hayes that he kept carefully guarded. Whatever had set him on his solitary path must have left deep scars. I should get back to the boarding house, he said finally. Early start tomorrow. Olivia nodded, disappointed but understanding. Thank you again for your help today. Your expertise has been invaluable. Rylan smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his face. Happy to be useful. See you at services tomorrow. I'll be the one saving you a seat, she reminded him. He tipped his hat and descended the porch steps. Olivia watched him walk away, his tall figure gradually disappearing into the darkness. She wondered if he would actually attend the service tomorrow or if his promise had been merely a courtesy. Returning inside, she found Martha waiting with a cup of tea. The older woman's knowing smile suggested she had witnessed the exchange on the porch. He's a good man, that Rylan Hayes, Martha said, handing Olivia the tea. Bit of a mystery, but good at heart. Yes, Olivia agreed, warming her hands on the cup. Though I know so little about him. Martha sat beside her at the kitchen table. Sometimes the heart knows things before the head catches up, she said cryptically. George and I met during the war, you know. Knew him all of 3 days before he shipped out. Wrote him letters for 2 years before he returned and asked me to marry him. And you said yes? After only knowing him for 3 days in person. Sometimes 3 days tells you all you need to know about a person's character, Martha replied with a shrug. The rest is just details to be filled in along the way. Olivia considered this as she sipped her tea. Could Martha be right? In the few days she had known Rylan, she had seen his courage, his work ethic, his kindness, and his quiet strength. Perhaps those core elements of character were indeed more important than knowing every detail of his past. Get some rest, dear, Martha said, patting Olivia's hand. Tomorrow's another day of rebuilding. As Olivia prepared for bed that night, her mind kept returning to Rylan. There was something about him that called to her not just gratitude for saving her life, but a deeper recognition, as if some part of her soul knew his. It was foolish, perhaps, these feelings for a man who might vanish as suddenly as he had appeared, but Olivia couldn't deny their presence. Sleep came slowly, her dreams filled with flames and falling timber, but also with strong arms carrying her to safety and a pair of storm-gray eyes watching over her through the night. Sunday morning dawned bright and clear. Olivia dressed with particular care in her best blue dress, one of the few possessions she had that hadn't been in the church when it burned. As she pinned up her hair, she found herself wondering if Rylan would notice, then chided herself for the girlish thought. The town hall was transformed for the morning service. Benches had been arranged in neat rows, and someone had crafted a simple wooden cross that stood behind a makeshift altar. Flowers from the townspeople's gardens brightened the otherwise plain space. Olivia arrived early, helping to distribute hymnal books that had been donated from neighboring towns. Her eyes kept drifting to the door, watching for Rylan, though she tried to pretend otherwise. The hall filled quickly. In times of tragedy, people often turned to faith for comfort, and it seemed all of Redemption Creek had answered the call today. Olivia had just begun to think Rylan wouldn't come when he appeared in the doorway. He looked different, almost uncomfortable in his Sunday best, a clean shirt and jacket that seemed a size too small for his broad shoulders. His usually unruly dark hair slicked back with water. He hesitated at the threshold, scanning the room until his gaze found hers. Relief visibly washed over him. Olivia raised her hand, gesturing to the empty space beside her. Rylan made his way through the crowd, nodding politely to those who greeted him, his status as the town's hero having spread quickly. "You came," Olivia said as he settled beside her. "I promised, didn't I?" Rylan replied, his voice low. "Though I feel about as comfortable as a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs." The image made Olivia smile. "You look nice," she offered. "Borrowed clothes," he admitted with a sheepish grin. "Mrs. Peterson at the boarding house insisted I couldn't come to church looking like I just wrestled a bear." Before Olivia could respond, Reverend Thomas called the congregation to order. The service was both solemn and hopeful, acknowledging the loss of their beloved church while emphasizing the strength of faith that transcended physical structures. When it came time to sing, Olivia was surprised to hear Rylan's deep baritone joining hers, quiet but sure. He knew the hymns, every word, though he'd claimed it had been a long time since he'd attended a service. "You sing well," she whispered as they sat down. "My mother's influence," he replied softly. "She was the church pianist back home." It was the first personal detail he had volunteered, and Olivia treasured it, a small window into the man beside her. After the service, the congregation lingered, discussing rebuilding plans and sharing a potluck lunch in the town square. Olivia found herself constantly aware of Rylan's presence as they moved among the townspeople. He was polite but reserved, accepting thanks for his heroism with obvious discomfort. "Not one for crowds, are you?" she asked when they finally had a moment alone. Rylan looked relieved at her perception. "That obvious?" "Only to someone who's watching," Olivia replied, then blushed at her inadvertent admission. A slow smile spread across Rylan's face. "Been watching me, Miss Simmons?" "Perhaps a little," she confessed. "You're something of a mystery, Mr. Hayes." Rylan's smile faded slightly. "No real mystery, just a simple man trying to make his way. A simple man who knows every word to Amazing Grace and can recite the Lord's Prayer from memory," Olivia pointed out. "A simple man with calluses that speak of hard work, yet hands that handle delicate tasks with surprising gentleness." Rylan looked down at his hands, then back at her, something vulnerable in his expression. "You see a lot." "I try to," she said simply. They stood in silence for a moment, the bustle of the town square continuing around them. Finally, Rylan spoke, his voice hesitant. "Would you walk with me? Away from the crowd? There's something I'd like to show you." Curious, Olivia nodded. They made their excuses to Martha, who gave them a knowing smile, and slipped away from the gathering. Rylan led her toward the edge of town, where a small creek meandered through a stand of cottonwoods. "I found this place yesterday," he explained as they followed a narrow path. "Reminded me of somewhere I used to go as a boy." The path opened onto a small clearing beside the creek, where wildflowers grew in abundance despite the late summer heat. It was a peaceful spot, the sound of running water creating a soothing backdrop to the rustling leaves overhead. "It's beautiful," Olivia said, breathing in the scent of wildflowers. Rylan nodded, looking pleased by her reaction. "Thought you might like a moment of peace. You've been working non-stop since the fire." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched Olivia deeply. She settled on a fallen log beside the creek, arranging her skirts. After a moment's hesitation, Rylan joined her. "May I ask you something?" she ventured. "I suppose that depends on the question," he replied, a wariness entering his tone. Olivia chose her words carefully. "You mentioned your mother was a church pianist. Is she still?" No, Rylan said quietly. Lost her and my father both in '67. Influenza. I'm sorry, Olivia said, her heart aching for him. My mother went the same way, though more recently. Rylan nodded, a shared understanding passing between them. It's a hard thing, watching someone waste away like that. It is, Olivia agreed. Is that when you started drifting? He looked surprised by her insight. Not right away. Had our family farm to run at first up in Wyoming territory. My brother Daniel and I tried to keep it going. He paused, his gaze distant. Things didn't work out. The careful way he said it suggested there was much more to the story, but Olivia didn't press. And your brother? Married now with 2 little ones. Lives in Denver with his wife's family. Rylan picked up a small stone and skipped it across the creek. We write sometimes. Olivia absorbed this information, piecing together the fragments of Rylan's life. Do you miss having a home? She asked softly. Rylan was quiet for so long that Olivia thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, Used to tell myself I didn't. That freedom was better than being tied to one place. He looked at her, something raw in his expression. But lately, I've been wondering if I was just running from ghosts that weren't actually chasing me. The honesty of his admission created an intimacy between them that transcended their short acquaintance. Olivia found herself wanting to reach for his hand but restrained herself. Thank you for bringing me here, she said instead. And for telling me about your family. Rylan nodded, seeming relieved that she hadn't pushed for more details. We should probably head back before your friend Martha sends out a search party. As they walked back toward town, closer now than before though not quite touching, Olivia felt a shift in their relationship, a deepening that both excited and frightened her. Rylan Hayes was still largely a mystery, but he was a mystery she increasingly wanted to solve. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm. Days were spent rebuilding the church, with the entire town pitching in when they could spare time from their regular work. The frame of the new building began to take shape, rising from the ashes of the old one like a phoenix reborn. Rylan proved invaluable to the effort. His carpentry skills were superior to most in town, and he worked tirelessly from dawn until dusk. He had a way of solving problems that others found insurmountable, finding creative solutions with the limited materials available. Olivia threw herself into the rebuilding with equal fervor. Though she lacked Rylan's strength or technical skills, she organized volunteers, kept records of donations, and made sure everyone had water and food during the long workdays. More importantly, she was a living link to the church's past, able to recall details about the original structure that helped guide the reconstruction. In the evenings, exhausted but satisfied, they often found themselves in each other's company. Sometimes they joined the Wilsons for dinner, other times they walked along the creek path that had become their special retreat. Gradually, Rylan shared more of his past small details at first, then larger stories as his trust in Olivia grew. She learned that he had been engaged once, years ago, to a girl named Sarah who had died before they could marry. He spoke of his parents with a mixture of reverence and lingering grief, especially his father, a stern but fair man who had taught him everything he knew about working with wood. In return, Olivia shared her own stories, her childhood in Redemption Creek, her brother's decision to fight for the Union despite their father's misgivings, her mother's unwavering faith even as illness ravaged her body. She made me promise to care for the church, Olivia confessed one evening as they sat by the creek. Said it was our family's legacy to the town. You're honoring that promise, Rylan assured her. Look at how much progress we've made already. It was true. In just 3 weeks, the skeleton of the church had risen, and they had begun work on the roof. The town council had voted to use some of the insurance money to commission new stained glass windows from a craftsman in Helena, though they wouldn't be ready for months. I couldn't have done it without you, Olivia said, looking up at him. The setting sun cast a golden glow across his features, softening the lines that hard work and harder living had etched there. Rylan met her gaze, something unreadable in his eyes. You would have found a way. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for, Olivia Simmons. The way he said her name, with a gentleness reserved only for her, made Olivia's heart flutter. They had been dancing around their growing feelings for weeks now, neither quite ready to acknowledge the connection that had formed between them. "How long will you stay?" she asked, the question that had been lurking in her mind since the beginning. Rylan looked away, his jawline tightening. "I don't know," he admitted. "The church will be weather-tight soon. They won't need as many hands after that." The thought of him leaving sent a pang through Olivia's chest. "And then you'll move on? Find the next job, the next town?" "That's been my way," he said carefully, "for a long time now." "And if there were reasons to stay?" Olivia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Rylan turned back to her, his eyes searching hers. "Are there reasons, Olivia?" The directness of his question caught her off guard. They stood on the precipice of something significant, and Olivia found herself suddenly afraid not of her feelings, but of his response to them. "I think you know there are," she finally said, gathering her courage. Rylan reached out slowly, taking her hand in his. His palm was rough with calluses warm against her skin. "I've been running so long," he said quietly. "Not sure I remember how to stay in one place." "Perhaps you just need the right place," Olivia suggested. "The right reasons." His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand, sending shivers up her arm. "Perhaps," he agreed, his voice low, "but I'm not the settling type, Olivia. At least I haven't been. Wouldn't want you counting on something I'm not sure I can give." His honesty, though painful, only increased Olivia's respect for him. "I'm not asking for promises," she said. "Just don't decide it's time to leave before you're sure that's what you want." Rylan's expression softened. "That seems fair." He hesitated, then added, "For what it's worth, this is the longest I've stayed anywhere in years. And it's not just the work keeping me here." The admission hung between them, a first step toward something more. As the sunset faded into twilight, they walked back to town hand in hand, both aware that something fundamental had changed between them. 2 days later, disaster struck the rebuilding effort. A sudden gust of wind during the hottest part of the afternoon caught a stack of lumber at the wrong angle. The heavy boards shifted, then collapsed, sending workers scrambling. Most escaped unharmed, but Rylan, who had been working nearby, wasn't as fortunate. Olivia had been in town collecting lunch for the workers when she heard the commotion. By the time she reached the church site, several men were carefully lifting a section of timber off Rylan's leg. "Get the doctor!" someone shouted as she approached. Olivia pushed through the crowd, her heart pounding in her chest. Rylan was conscious but pale, his jaw clenched in obvious pain. When he saw her, he attempted a reassuring smile that looked more like a grimace. "Not as bad as it looks," he managed, though the growing bloodstain on his pant leg suggested otherwise. "Don't you dare lie to me, Rylan Hayes," Olivia said, kneeling beside him. She ripped a strip from her petticoat and wrapped it tightly around his thigh, trying to slow the bleeding. Dr. Morgan arrived moments later, his medical bag in hand. After a quick examination, he ordered several men to carry Rylan to his office. "Is it broken?" Olivia asked, hurrying alongside as they lifted Rylan onto a makeshift stretcher. "Can't tell yet," Dr. Morgan replied grimly. "There's a nasty gash that needs stitching first. The impact could have fractured the bone beneath." Rylan reached for Olivia's hand as they prepared to move him. "Don't worry," he said, his voice strained but steady. "Takes more than a pile of lumber to keep me down." "Save your strength," Olivia told him, squeezing his hand. I'll be right behind you. The next few hours were agonizing. Olivia paced the small waiting area of Dr. Morgan's office while the doctor cleaned and stitched Rylan's wound, then set about determining if the leg was broken. Martha Wilson arrived with food and fresh clothes for Olivia, her face creased with concern. "Any word yet?" she asked. Olivia shook her head. "Dr. Morgan is still with him. It's been over 2 hours." Martha wrapped an arm around Olivia's shoulders. "That man is as sturdy as they come. He'll pull through." "I know," Olivia said, though worry gnawed at her insides. "It's just, he's been through so much already." Martha studied her face. "You care for him quite a bit, don't you?" Olivia nodded, unable to deny it. "More than I should, perhaps, given how little time we've known each other." "Time isn't always the best measure of such things," Martha said wisely. "George and I know, Olivia said with a small laugh. 3 days and 2 years of letters. And 23 years of marriage," Martha added with a wink. "Sometimes the heart knows best." Before Olivia could respond, Dr. Morgan emerged from the examination room, wiping his hands on a towel. "How is he?" Olivia asked immediately. "Lucky," the doctor replied. "The leg isn't broken, though there's considerable bruising and a deep laceration that required 15 stitches. He'll need to stay off it completely for at least a week, then use crutches for several more." Relief flooded through Olivia. "Can I see him?" Dr. Morgan nodded. "I've given him something for the pain, so he's a bit groggy, but he's been asking for you." Olivia hurried into the room, Martha tactfully remaining behind. Rylan lay on the examination table, his injured leg elevated on pillows and heavily bandaged. His face was drawn with pain despite the medication, but he managed a tired smile when she entered. "There she is," he said, his voice slightly slurred. "Told the doc you'd be wearing a hole in his floor out there." Olivia moved to his side, taking his hand in both of hers. "You gave us all quite a scare." "Gave myself one too," he admitted. "Thought I might have lost the leg for a minute there." "Dr. Morgan says you were lucky." Rylan's eyes, though dulled by painkillers, found hers with surprising clarity. "Been lucky since the day I rode into this town," he said softly. The words made Olivia's heart skip, but she maintained her composure. "The doctor says you'll need complete rest for at least a week." "Can't do that," Rylan protested, attempting to sit up. "The church will still be there when you're healed," Olivia said firmly, gently pressing him back down. "The others can manage without you for a while." Rylan frowned, clearly unhappy with the situation. "Where am I supposed to rest? Can't exactly climb the stairs to my room at the boarding house." "You'll stay with us," Martha declared, entering the room. "We have a small room off the kitchen. George can move a bed in there today." "I couldn't impose," Rylan began. "Nonsense," Martha cut him off. "Consider it partial repayment for what you've done for this town." For Olivia, Rylan looked like he wanted to argue further, but exhaustion and pain were winning out over pride. "Thank you," he finally said, "just until I can manage on my own." "Of course," Martha agreed, though she winked at Olivia over his head. "Now, Dr. Morgan says we can move you once George brings the wagon around. You just rest until then." As Martha bustled out to make arrangements, Olivia remained at Rylan's side, still holding his hand. "You don't have to stay," Rylan said, though his fingers tightened around hers. "I want to," Olivia replied simply. Rylan's eyes began to drift closed, the medication finally taking full effect. "Been thinking about what you said," he murmured, his voice fading, "about having reasons to stay." Olivia's breath caught in her throat. "And think I might have found a few good ones," he said, the words slurring as sleep overtook him. His hand went slack in hers as his breathing evened out. Olivia sat beside him, watching the rise and fall of his chest, wondering if he would remember his words when he woke. Whether he did or not, she tucked them away in her heart, a fragile hope to nurture in the days ahead. Rylan's recovery proved more challenging than anyone had anticipated. The wound became infected 2 days after the accident, sending his temperature soaring and requiring Dr. Morgan to reopen and clean the gash. For 48 hours, Olivia barely left his side, bathing his forehead with cool cloths as he thrashed in feverish delirium. During those dark hours, Rylan called out names from his past: his parents, his brother Daniel, the long-dead Sarah. Sometimes he seemed to be reliving the church fire, shouting for Olivia and struggling to rise from the bed. Only her voice and touch could calm him in those moments, reassuring him that she was safe, that they both were. On the third night, when his fever finally broke, Olivia was dozing in a chair beside his bed. She woke to find Rylan watching her, his eyes clear for the first time in days. "You're still here," he said, his voice hoarse but steady. Olivia straightened, smoothing back her disheveled hair. "Of course I am. How long was I out?" "Nearly 3 days," she replied, pouring water from a pitcher into a cup. "You had us worried." Rylan accepted the water gratefully, his hand shaking slightly as he drank. "Sorry to be such trouble." "Hush," Olivia scolded gently. "You'd do the same for any of us." "For you," he corrected, his gaze direct despite his weakened state. "Not sure about the others." The admission hung between them, honest in a way that only near brushes with death can inspire. Olivia felt her cheeks warm under his steady gaze. "You should rest," she said, taking the cup from him. "Dr. Morgan says you're past the worst of it, but you're still weak." Rylan caught her hand before she could move away. "Thank you," he said simply, "for staying." Olivia smiled, squeezing his fingers lightly. "Get some sleep. I'll be here when you wake up." True to her word, Olivia remained a constant presence during Rylan's recovery. When she couldn't be at his bedside due to church rebuilding duties, Martha or one of the Wilson children kept him company. Though initially resistant to being cared for, Rylan gradually accepted their help with grudging gratitude. By the end of the second week, he was able to move around the Wilsons' house on crutches, his strength returning daily. Dr. Morgan pronounced the wound healing well, though he cautioned against returning to heavy labor too quickly. "Another 2 weeks at least before you think about lifting anything heavier than a dinner plate," the doctor instructed. Rylan chafed at the restrictions but complied, aware of how close he had come to losing his leg or worse. Instead of physical labor, he found other ways to contribute to the church rebuilding. His expertise in carpentry translated well to drawing up detailed plans for the interior woodwork, and he spent hours sketching designs for the altar, pews, and pulpit. Olivia often joined him at the kitchen table in the evenings, offering suggestions and reminiscing about details of the original church. Their heads bent close together over the drawings. They created a vision of the new sanctuary that honored the past while embracing the future. "My father would have loved these designs," Olivia said one evening, tracing her finger along a particularly intricate pattern Rylan had created for the choir loft railing. "You think so?" Rylan asked, pleased by her approval. "I know so. He always said a church should be beautiful as well as functional." Olivia's smile was touched with nostalgia. He believed that craftsmanship was a form of worship in itself. Rylan nodded, understanding in his eyes. "My father felt the same way about farming. Said tending the land God gave us was a form of prayer." "They would have liked each other, I think," Olivia said softly. "Our fathers probably would have argued about whether working wood or working soil was the higher calling," Rylan replied with a chuckle. "But yes, I think they would have found common ground." These quiet moments of connection had become precious to both of them. Though neither had spoken directly of their feelings since the night of Rylan's accident, something deeper than friendship had clearly taken root between them. The Wilsons' youngest daughter, 6-year-old Emma, had no such reservations about addressing the situation. One evening as Olivia was helping her get ready for bed, the child asked innocently, "Are you going to marry Mr. Hayes, Miss Olivia?" Olivia nearly dropped the hairbrush she was using on Emma's curls. "What makes you ask that, sweetheart?" Emma shrugged. "You look at him the way Mama looks at Papa. And he smiles different when you're in the room. Mama says that's what happens when grown-ups are sweet on each other." "Does she now?" Olivia asked, making a mental note to have a word with Martha about discussing such things in front of impressionable children. "Well, Mr. Hayes and I are good friends who've been through a difficult time together. But do you love him?" Emma persisted, turning to look at Olivia with wide, curious eyes. The directness of the question, so typical of children, caught Olivia off guard. Did she love Rylan Hayes? The man who had saved her life, who had stayed to help rebuild her mother's church, who had shared pieces of his past that he guarded so carefully from others. "Love is a complicated thing, Emma," she finally said, resuming her brushing of the girl's hair. Emma seemed unsatisfied with this answer but allowed the subject to drop, much to Olivia's relief. That night, however, the child's question lingered in Olivia's mind as she prepared for bed. Did she love Rylan? And if she did, what then? He had spoken of reasons to stay, but he remained a man accustomed to wandering, to leaving before attachments grew too deep. As October arrived, bringing with it cooler temperatures and the first hints of fall color, the church rebuilding continued apace. The roof was complete, the walls insulated, and the windows temporary ones until the stained glass arrived installed. The town's spirits lifted with each milestone achieved. Rylan, finally cleared by Dr. Morgan for light duties, had begun crafting smaller elements for the church interior in the Wilsons' barn, which they had converted to a temporary workshop. Though still using a cane, he moved with increasing ease, his natural vigor returning day by day. One crisp afternoon, Olivia carried a basket of lunch out to the workshop, having promised Martha she would make sure Rylan actually stopped to eat. She found him absorbed in carving decorative elements for the communion rail, his strong hands guiding the chisel with precision. "Lunch," she announced, setting down the basket. "Martha says if you don't eat it all, she'll come out here herself and feed you like a baby." Rylan looked up with a grin, setting aside his tools and dusting wood shavings from his hands. "Can't have that. The woman's already done enough for my dignity." Olivia unpacked the basket, laying out bread, cheese, and cold chicken on a clean section of workbench. "How's it coming along?" "See for yourself," Rylan invited, gesturing to the partially completed railing segment. Delicate vines and leaves emerged from the wood, each detail lovingly carved. "It's beautiful," Olivia breathed, running her fingers lightly over the carving. "You have a remarkable gift, Rylan." He shrugged off the compliment, though pleasure showed in his eyes. "Just something my grandfather taught me. He was the real artist in the family." "Well, I think he'd be proud of what you've created here." Olivia handed him a plate. "Now eat, before it gets cold." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. The workshop warmed despite the autumn chill outside. Through the open barn door, they could see golden leaves drifting from the cottonwoods lining the creek. "Winter will be here before we know it," Rylan observed, following her gaze. "Think we'll have the church finished by Christmas?" "Reverend Thomas certainly hopes so," Olivia replied. "He's already talking about a special Christmas Eve service to consecrate the new building." Rylan nodded thoughtfully. It would be fitting. A new beginning at year's end. Something in his tone made Olivia glance at him sharply. You say that as if you don't expect to be here to see it. Rylan set down his plate, his expression unreadable. My legs nearly healed. Most of the skilled work left is finishing the interior, which the town carpenter can handle. A cold weight settled in Olivia's stomach. So you're planning to leave? It wasn't a question, but Rylan answered anyway. I haven't decided yet. I see, Olivia said, trying to keep the hurt from her voice. After all their time together, all they had shared, he was still contemplating returning to his drifter's life. When would you go? Rylan ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she had come to recognize as a sign of his discomfort. Couple of weeks, maybe. Before the heavy snow makes travel difficult. Olivia stood abruptly, gathering the remains of their lunch with hands that weren't quite steady. Well, thank you for being honest. I should get back to the house. Martha will be wondering where I've gone. Olivia, Rylan said, rising to his feet. It's not that simple, isn't it? She challenged, finally allowing some of her frustration to show. You either want to stay or you don't. That's just it, Rylan said, his voice roughening with emotion. I do want to stay. For the first time in years, I found a place that feels like it could be home. He took a step toward her. Found people who matter to me. Then why leave? Olivia asked, her heart beating faster at his admission. Rylan's expression was conflicted. Because wanting to stay terrifies me. Because the last time I put down roots, I lost everything. My parents, Sarah, the farm. Even my relationship with Daniel was never the same afterward. Understanding dawned on Olivia. So you keep moving to avoid losing anything else. Sounds foolish when you put it that way, Rylan admitted with a rueful smile. But old habits are hard to break. Olivia set down the basket, moving closer to him. The night of your accident, when you were fevered, you said something about having reasons to stay. Rylan met her gaze steadily. I meant it, he said quietly. You're the best reason I've found in a long, long time. Olivia Simmons. The simple honesty of his words made Olivia's breath catch. Then stay, she said, reaching for his hand. Not forever if you're not ready for that promise. Just stay for now. See where this leads. Rylan looked down at their joined hands, then back at her face. The struggle was visible in his eyes, the pull of the open road versus the comfort of belonging somewhere, to someone. I'm not the man your parents would have chosen for you, he said finally. No property, no steady profession. Just these hands and whatever work they can find. My parents would have wanted me to be happy, Olivia replied. And you, Rylan Hayes, make me happier than I've been since I lost them. Something shifted in Rylan's expression, a decision being made. Slowly, he raised his free hand to cup her cheek. I can't promise forever, he said, his voice low and intense. Not yet. But I can promise to try, to stay through the winter at least, to see the church completed, to give us time to figure out what this is between us. It wasn't the declaration of undying love that young girls dreamed of, but to Olivia, it was something better, an honest commitment from a man who had spent years avoiding exactly that. That's all I'm asking, she said softly. Rylan's thumb traced the curve of her cheek, his eyes never leaving hers. Then, with gentle deliberation, he lowered his head and kissed her. It was a tentative kiss at first, a question being asked and answered. Olivia's hands moved to his shoulders as she rose on tiptoe to meet him more fully, her response leaving no doubt about her feelings. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, Rylan rested his forehead against hers. I should have done that weeks ago, he murmured. Yes, you should have, Olivia agreed with a small laugh. But you're doing it now, and that's what matters. As they walked back to the Wilson house hand in hand, Olivia felt a new lightness in her step. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time since the fire, She was looking forward to it with hope rather than trepidation. Martha's knowing smile when they entered the kitchen together suggested that very little about the change in their relationship would come as a surprise to the observant woman. Emma's delighted, "I knew it," only confirmed that their feelings had been obvious to everyone but themselves for quite some time. That evening, as the household settled down for the night, Olivia stood on the porch watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Rylan joined her, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders against the autumn chill. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, standing close beside her. Olivia leaned into his warmth. "I was thinking about the fire, how something so terrible could ultimately lead to something good." Rylan nodded thoughtfully. "Life has a way of working like that sometimes. The worst moments can put us on a path to the best ones. Is that what happened with you? After you lost the farm?" Rylan was quiet for a moment, his arm tightening around her. "Maybe," he finally said, "if losing everything back then led me here to you, then yes, I'd say good came from bad." It was as close to a declaration as Rylan Hayes was likely to make, but to Olivia it was enough. They had both lost so much family, home, security, but standing together under the vast Montana sky, they had found something just as valuable: the chance to build something new from the ashes of the past. As the first snowfall of the season dusted Redemption Creek in early December, the church rebuilding entered its final phase. The exterior was complete, the interior nearly so. Rylan's beautifully crafted altar, pulpit, and communion rail had been installed, along with simple but elegant pews that would serve the congregation for generations to come. True to his word, Rylan had stayed. Though he maintained his room at the boarding house, he spent most evenings with Olivia at the Wilsons, who had welcomed him into their family circle with open arms. The town, too, had embraced him, no longer seeing him as the drifter who had appeared in their moment of need, but as one of their own. Olivia watched with growing contentment as Rylan put down roots in Redemption Creek. He had begun taking on carpentry commissions from townspeople impressed with his work on the church, and there was talk of him partnering with the aging town carpenter, who was eager for an apprentice to eventually take over his business. More importantly, Rylan seemed at peace with staying. The restlessness that had occasionally shadowed his eyes in the early days had gradually faded. He still spoke of his past with care, but the pain that had driven him to years of wandering seemed to be healing. 2 weeks before Christmas, Olivia visited the church alone. Snow crunched beneath her boots as she approached the new building, so similar to the original and yet different in subtle ways. The door was unlocked. Workers were still coming and going throughout the day, and she slipped inside, welcoming the relative warmth. The interior was quiet, the workers having finished for the day. Late afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, creating pools of golden light on the newly installed wooden floor. Olivia moved slowly through the space, running her fingers along the smooth pews, admiring the craftsmanship that had gone into every detail. At the altar, she paused, overcome with emotion. From the ashes of destruction, they had created something beautiful, a testament to faith, community, and resilience. Her mother would have been proud. "I thought I might find you here." Rylan's voice came from behind her. Olivia turned to see him standing in the center aisle, hat in hand, snowflakes melting on his shoulders. "I wanted to see it alone," she explained, "to say a proper goodbye to the old church before Christmas Eve." Rylan nodded, understanding in his eyes as he moved to join her at the altar. "Do you think your parents would have approved of the new design?" "I know they would have," Olivia said confidently, "especially your contributions. My father always appreciated fine craftsmanship." Rylan smiled, though there was a hint of nervousness in his expression that Olivia couldn't quite place. "I'm glad," he said. "Their approval would have meant a lot to me." "Why?" Olivia asked, curious about his sudden interest in her parents' opinion. Rylan took a deep breath, as if gathering his courage. Because I'd like to think they would have approved of me as well. Not just my work, but as a man worthy of their daughter. Olivia's heart began to race as Rylan took her hands in his. Rylan, I had a whole speech planned, he said with a self-deprecating smile. Practiced it for days. But now that I'm standing here with you, the words don't seem adequate. To Olivia's astonishment, Rylan lowered himself to one knee before her, wincing slightly as his injured leg protested the movement. Olivia Simmons, he said, his voice steady despite the emotion visible in his eyes. When I rode into Redemption Creek that night, I was just passing through, same as I'd been doing for years. I had no intention of staying, of building anything lasting. He squeezed her hands gently. Then I ran into that burning church and found you, and everything changed. Tears filled Olivia's eyes as she realized what was happening. Rylan, she whispered. I can't offer you wealth or a distinguished name, he continued, but I can promise you this. I will build us a good life here. I'll work hard, love you faithfully, and never again run from what matters most. From his pocket, he produced a simple gold band. If you'll have me, I'd like to spend the rest of my days proving that the man you saved is worthy of the love you've given him. Olivia was crying openly now, tears of joy streaming down her face. I didn't save you, Rylan. You saved me. Maybe we saved each other, he suggested with a gentle smile. What do you say, Olivia? Will you marry me? Yes, she said without hesitation. Yes, Rylan Hayes, I will marry you. Rylan slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, then rose to his feet, gathering her into his arms. Their kiss was a promise, a sealing of the bond that had formed between them amid fire and ashes, strengthened through rebuilding, and now culminating in a commitment to a shared future. When they finally parted, both breathless and laughing through tears, Rylan pressed his forehead to hers. I love you, he said simply. Should have said it weeks ago. I love you too, Olivia replied. And you're saying it now. That's what matters. Hand in hand, they walked the length of the church, their footsteps echoing in the sacred space that had brought them together. Outside, snow was falling more heavily, blanketing Redemption Creek in pristine white. The future stretched before them, full of possibility. When? Olivia asked as they stepped onto the church porch. The wedding, Rylan considered this, his arms secure around her waist. Spring, maybe? When the wildflowers bloom by our creek. The casual way he referred to it as their creek made Olivia's heart swell with happiness. Spring sounds perfect, she agreed. And where will we live? I've been thinking about that, Rylan admitted. There's a piece of land for sale on the east edge of town. Good spot for building a house. Nothing fancy at first, but we could add to it over the years. The thought that he was planning not just for their immediate future but for years to come told Olivia everything she needed to know about how completely Rylan had embraced staying in Redemption Creek with her. Our own home, she said, savoring the words. Built by your hands. Our hands, Rylan corrected. I seem to recall you're pretty handy with a hammer yourself. Olivia laughed, remembering their early days working on the church together. We make a good team. The best, Rylan agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple as they walked toward town, their future stretching out before them like the unbroken snow. On Christmas Eve, the new church of Redemption Creek was filled to overflowing. Lanterns glowed warmly in the windows, casting a welcoming light into the winter night. Every pew was occupied, with additional chairs brought in to accommodate the crowd. At the front of the church, Reverend Thomas stood beside the altar Rylan had crafted, his face solemn yet joyful as he prepared to consecrate the new building. Beside him stood Olivia and Rylan, their engagement having been announced to the town the previous Sunday to general delight. Friends and neighbors, the Reverend began, his voice carrying to every corner of the sanctuary. For months ago, we stood together and watched as fire consumed our beloved church. In that dark hour, it would have been easy to despair, to believe that what was lost could never be regained. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the congregation. Yet tonight, we gather in this beautiful new sanctuary, built by our own hands, a testament to what can be accomplished when faith and community work together. The Reverend gestured to Olivia and Rylan. I have asked Miss Simmons and Mr. Hayes to join me tonight because they embody the journey we have all taken from destruction to renewal, from loss to hope. Olivia felt Rylan's hand tighten around hers, drawing strength from his solid presence beside her. Miss Simmons lost not only a building that night, but a connection to her family's legacy in our town, Reverend Thomas continued. Mr. Hayes, a stranger passing through, risked his life to save her from the flames. In the months since, they have worked tirelessly alongside all of you to rebuild not just our church, but a future for themselves here in Redemption Creek. The Reverend turned to face them directly. Would you share a few words with us tonight? Olivia took a deep breath, facing the congregation friends, neighbors, people who had known her all her life. When the fire took our church, I thought I had failed the promise I made to my mother, she said, her clear voice carrying in the hushed sanctuary. But she always told me that a church isn't just a building, it's the people who gather within it, the community of faith that supports one another through joy and sorrow. She glanced at Rylan, drawing courage from his encouraging smile. What rose from those ashes wasn't just a new building, but a stronger community. And for me personally, an unexpected gift. Her fingers interlaced with Rylan's. Sometimes our greatest blessings come disguised as our darkest moments. Rylan stepped forward slightly, his usual reticence in public settings giving way to the importance of the moment. I came to Redemption Creek with no intention of staying, he admitted, his deep voice steady. I'd spent years drifting from place to place, never putting down roots, never allowing myself to belong anywhere. His gaze swept across the congregation before returning to Olivia's face. Then I ran into a burning church and found this remarkable woman. In saving her, I somehow saved myself as well. Through her courage and this community's acceptance, I found something I'd stopped believing in a place to call home. A hush fell over the church as his words resonated with everyone present. Then Reverend Thomas stepped forward again, laying a hand on each of their shoulders. Let us pray, he said, bowing his head. Lord, we dedicate this church to your glory, built on the foundation of faith that no fire can destroy. We thank you for bringing light from darkness, hope from despair, and new beginnings from endings. Bless this sanctuary and all who worship here, and bless especially these two, whose journey from strangers to beloved reminds us of your grace that makes all things new. Amen. Amen. The congregation echoed. As the service continued with familiar Christmas hymns and readings, Olivia leaned slightly against Rylan's shoulder, overwhelmed by the journey they had taken since that fateful night in August. From the terror of being trapped in flames to the joy of standing beside the man she loved in a rebuilt sanctuary, it seemed almost too much for one heart to contain. Later, as they walked through the snowy streets toward the Wilsons' home for Christmas Eve supper, Olivia looked up at the star-filled sky. Do you believe in Providence, Rylan? She asked softly. Rylan considered the question seriously. I didn't used to, he admitted. Thought life was just a series of random events, some good, some bad. But now. He gazed down at her, love evident in his expression. What else explains a drifter with no destination finding himself exactly where he needed to be, exactly when someone needed him, and exactly who he needed? Olivia added, squeezing his arm. Rylan nodded, a smile spreading across his face. Exactly who he needed, he agreed. though I never would have guessed that the path to finding you would involve charging into a burning building. God works in mysterious ways, Olivia said with a light laugh. Though perhaps next time, he could choose a less dramatic introduction. Next time, Rylan raised an eyebrow in amusement. Planning on meeting other men in burning buildings, are you? Olivia stood on tiptoe to kiss his cold cheek. No need. I've already found the one worth running into fires for. Rylan pulled her close, his arms strong and secure around her. And I found the one worth staying for, he murmured against her hair. Fire, flood, or whatever else comes our way, we'll face it together. As they continued toward the warmth and welcome of the Wilsons' home, the church bell rang out across the snow-covered town, its clear tone a reminder of all that had been lost and found, destroyed and rebuilt. For Olivia and Rylan, it was the sound of a promise fulfilled and a future beginning, a future neither could have imagined before a desperate fire and a fateful rescue brought them together in Redemption Creek. Spring arrived in Montana with its usual capriciousness, warm, golden days followed by sudden snowstorms, then sunshine again. By May, however, the weather had settled into a reliable pattern of mild days and cool nights, perfect for the wedding that the entire town of Redemption Creek had been anticipating all winter. In the 5 months since their Christmas Eve engagement, Rylan and Olivia had been building their future together piece by piece. True to his word, Rylan had purchased the plot of land at the eastern edge of town, with a view of both the mountains and the creek that had become their special retreat. Throughout the winter, whenever weather permitted, he had worked on constructing their home, a modest cabin at first, but designed with future expansions in mind. The townspeople had rallied around the project just as they had for the church rebuilding. Men appeared on weekends to help raise walls and set roof beams, while women organized meals for the workers and sewed curtains and quilts for the newlyweds' home. It was a community effort, a testament to how completely Rylan had been embraced as one of their own. Olivia had divided her time between helping with the house, continuing her duties at the new church, and preparing for the wedding. Martha Wilson had taken charge of the wedding arrangements with characteristic efficiency, declaring that the bride had quite enough on her plate without worrying about every detail of the celebration. On the morning of their wedding day, Olivia stood in the Wilsons' spare room, the same room she had occupied since the fire, gazing at her reflection in the mirror. Her wedding dress was simple but elegant, ivory satin with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, made by the town seamstress from a pattern Olivia's mother had saved for her daughter's future wedding. Your mother would be so proud, Martha said, entering the room with a bouquet of spring wildflowers gathered from the creek bank that morning. You look absolutely beautiful, my dear. Olivia took the flowers, breathing in their fresh scent. Do you think they're watching somehow? My parents. I've no doubt of it, Martha replied firmly, adjusting the small wreath of flowers on Olivia's head. And they're smiling down on you and that fine man you're about to marry. A knock at the door interrupted them. George Wilson poked his head in, his eyes widening at the sight of Olivia in her wedding finery. Well now, he said, uncharacteristically emotional. Aren't you a vision? He cleared his throat. It's time, ladies. The church is full to bursting, and I've been told the groom is pacing so much he might wear a hole in the new floor. Olivia laughed, her nervousness giving way to pure joy. This was right. This was meant to be. Then we shouldn't keep him waiting, she said, gathering her skirts. George offered his arm. In the absence of her father, he had agreed to give Olivia away, an honor that had brought tears to the gruff man's eyes when she had asked him months ago. The short walk to the church was like a dream. May sunshine bathed the town in golden light, and wildflowers bloomed in profusion along the path. Townsfolk who weren't already at the church stood in their doorways to wave and call blessings as the bride passed by. At the church steps, Martha hurried ahead to take her place inside, giving Olivia's hand one last squeeze of encouragement. George patted her arm where it rested on his. "Ready?" he asked. Olivia nodded, her heart too full for words. The church doors opened, and the assembled congregation rose to their feet as Olivia and George began their processional down the aisle. The new sanctuary, completed just before Christmas, had never looked more beautiful. Sunlight streamed through the still temporary windows. The stained glass was due to arrive by summer's end, and flowers decorated every pew end and windowsill. But Olivia's eyes were drawn immediately to the figure standing at the altar. Rylan Hayes, the drifter who had run into a burning building and found not just a woman in distress but his own future, waited for her in his best suit. His dark hair neatly combed, his face alight with wonder as he watched her approach. Beside him stood his brother Daniel, who had traveled from Denver with his family for the occasion. The reunion between the brothers had been emotional and healing, mending a rift that had widened over years of separation. Daniel's presence today was yet another sign of how Rylan was reconnecting with all he had once fled from. As Olivia reached the altar, George placed her hand in Rylan's with a gruff, "Take care of her, son." Then he stepped back, joining Martha in the front pew. "You're beautiful," Rylan whispered, his eyes never leaving her face. Reverend Thomas smiled at them both before addressing the congregation. "Dearly beloved," he began, his voice carrying easily in the perfect acoustics of the new church. "We are gathered here today in the sight of God to join together this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The familiar words washed over Olivia as she stood hand in hand with Rylan. 9 months ago, she had been trapped in a burning church, certain she was about to die. Now she stood in the rebuilt sanctuary, beginning a new life with the man who had saved her. When it came time for their vows, Rylan spoke with a quiet certainty that belied his former reluctance to put down roots. "I, Rylan, take you, Olivia, to be my wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." His voice caught slightly on the last phrase, and Olivia squeezed his hands in understanding. They had both seen enough of death and loss to know the weight of such a promise. When her turn came, Olivia's voice rang clear and true. "I, Olivia, take you, Rylan, to be my wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." The exchange of rings followed a simple gold band to match her engagement ring for Olivia, a slightly wider one for Rylan. As they slid the rings onto each other's fingers, Olivia was struck by the symbolism of the unbroken circle, no beginning, no end, just continuous connection. "By the power vested in me," Reverend Thomas concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." He smiled warmly at them both. "Rylan, you may kiss your bride." Rylan needed no further encouragement. Drawing Olivia close, he kissed her with a tender passion that spoke of both reverence and desire, prompting a few good-natured whoops from the congregation. "Ladies and gentlemen," the Reverend announced as they turned to face their friends and neighbors, "I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Hayes." Cheers erupted throughout the church as Olivia and Rylan made their way back down the aisle, now husband and wife. Outside on the church steps, they were showered with flower petals and embraced by what seemed like the entire population of Redemption Creek. The celebration that followed was held in the town square, where tables had been set up and laden with food contributed by every household. Music, dancing, speeches, and toasts continued well into the evening. The entire town determined to give the couple a send-off worthy of the story that had brought them together. As twilight settled over Redemption Creek, Rylan took Olivia's hand. "Ready to see our home, Mrs. Hayes?" he asked softly. Olivia's heart leapt at both the name and the prospect. Though she had helped with much of the construction, Rylan had insisted on completing the interior himself, keeping the final touches a surprise for their wedding day. They slipped away from the celebration amid knowing smiles and called blessings. Rylan had arranged for a buggy, decorated with ribbons and flowers, to take them the short distance to their new home. As they approached, Olivia gasped in delight. Lanterns had been hung from the porch posts and trees surrounding the cabin, creating a warm, welcoming glow in the gathering darkness. The house itself was small but solidly built, with a covered porch wrapping around two sides and windows that would catch both the morning and evening light. Rylan helped her from the buggy, then swept her into his arms before she could take a step toward the house. "Rylan," Olivia laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Your leg is perfectly healed," he assured her, carrying her up the steps and across the threshold. "And strong enough to carry my wife into our home for the first time." Inside, Olivia's eyes widened in wonder. Though the furnishings were simple, every detail showed Rylan's craftsmanship and thoughtfulness. A sturdy table and chairs occupied one corner, a small sofa and rocking chair another. A cast iron stove provided both heat and cooking space. Through a doorway, she glimpsed their bedroom, where a handmade bed with a carved headboard waited, covered with one of Martha's wedding quilts. But what brought tears to Olivia's eyes was the small bookshelf beside the fireplace. On it sat several items she recognized immediately: her mother's Bible, her father's pocket watch, and a small framed photograph of her parents on their wedding day. All had been in her room at the church when the fire struck, and she had believed them lost forever. "How?" she whispered, moving to touch the precious mementos. "They were found during the cleanup," Rylan explained, coming to stand beside her. "The Bible was badly damaged, but Martha and I worked on restoring it as best we could. The watch needed cleaning but still works. And the photograph. Well, the frame was ruined, but the picture itself survived in a metal box that protected it from the worst of the fire." Olivia turned to him, overwhelmed by the thought and love that had gone into such a gift. "You saved them for me, just like you saved me." Rylan pulled her gently into his arms. "I wanted you to have a piece of them here, in our home, so they're part of our beginning too." Olivia rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I love you, Rylan Hayes." "And I love you, Olivia Hayes," he replied, still sounding a bit awed at the reality of their marriage. "More than I ever thought possible." As night fell completely outside their windows, they stood together in the home they would share, surrounded by the tangible evidence of both their pasts and their future. From the ashes of loss, they had forged something new and precious: a love built on courage, commitment, and the willingness to risk everything for another chance at happiness. For Olivia, whose life had once revolved around keeping a promise to preserve the past, the future now stretched before her like an open road, full of possibility. And for Rylan, who had spent years avoiding attachment, afraid of what he might lose, the path ahead was no longer a solitary one. Together, they had discovered that sometimes the greatest act of faith is to stand among the ruins of what was and believe in what could be. And sometimes, the surest way to honor those we've lost is to love boldly in their absence. As Rylan lowered his head to kiss his bride once more, Olivia silently thanked the fire that had taken her mother's church but given her something equally precious in return: a love story written in flames and rebuilt from ashes, stronger and more beautiful than either of them could have imagined on that fateful night when their paths first crossed.